All right, so now I'll be showing you how to use the muscle properties and muscle constraint properties to assign properties to your different muscles. In this video, we're not going to be looking at the actual values of these properties or what they control. So don't worry about me not explaining that. That will come later. I'm just going to be showing how you set the values and how the values stack together. But right now I'm just going to use arbitrary values. So don't take them as having any significance. So this whole interface is designed to make it easier to assign different values, different properties to different muscles. And it does that by working with essentially all these multiparm tabs. Just in case it isn't clear, these are all different tabs, right? And this works as a stack. So it's similar to, say, certain image editing softwares that work with layers, where number one is your layer at the bottom. So this first tab is the bottom layer. The second tab is the next layer. The highest numbered tab is the top layer. So anything here will override anything below it. And the reason this is useful is because it stops you from having to create multiple nodes to tweak hundreds of muscles potentially. However, it might be a little bit counterintuitive in a sense to people who are used to working with Houdini, because you might be used to diving in and immediately painting a lot of masks or creating groups, all these sorts of things to control what you want. Because it's trying to make things easier for you, you might feel like you're being limited. The thing to remember with Houdini is you can always go and do things your way. But I would recommend at least giving this a try first and trying to do it the way it was designed to do. And then only if you find that it's not working for you, then go do it in your own way, rather than trying to do it in your own way first and then fighting against this. So let's have a look. I'm going to clear these and start again. So your first tab or the bottom of your layer stack, you always want to leave the group field blank so that you can assign it to all the muscles. So when the group is blank, it means affect all the muscles. And the property label is optional, but it's really just there to help clarify to you what it is that you're setting. So I'm just going to say general settings. Right. And now the other important thing for the first tab is I recommend toggling on all of these parameters, because these are going to create well, either way, so these parameters all correspond to attributes, but those attributes will be created whether you toggle it on or not, right? If we look at our point attribute list, I should probably pin it. If you toggle this on and off, it's not changing the number of point attributes. So the tendon mask exists whether we turn this on or not. And for the most part, the default attribute value that gets created is going to correspond to the default parameter value. But there are a couple of parameters and attributes where they are no longer quite in sync. I think between different Houdini versions, they got changed slightly, and for backward compatibility reasons, the parameters weren't updated. So I like to turn them all on so that there is no mystery about what these values actually are. You can even look in the geometry spreadsheet, and I already know the ones in question are the fiber strength, which you can see here when I hover over it. The parameter label is fiber strength. The parameter name is fiber stiffness 1, and that parameter name is going to, ignoring the one at the end, that corresponds to the tab it's in, but the fiber stiffness is going to be the name of the attribute that it's setting. So here you can see the fiber stiffness attribute, and when I turn this off, it's a value of 0.5. When I turn it on, it's a value of 5. So this is one of them where there's a mismatch. The other one is the tendon stiffness. If I go to tendon stiffness, you see when it's off, it goes to 100. When it's on, it goes to 25. So that is why I like to just turn them all on, and I don't have to worry about remembering which ones don't match. There's no mystery about what the actual values are. It's very clear to see what it is. And it also makes sense. It sort of helps you in the mentality of saying, in this tab, I am setting all the values, right? Because you are, whether you're toggling them on in the first tab or not, you are setting all the values. In subsequent tabs, you're only setting the parameters that you toggle on. So if I set the fiber strength to 5 here and 9.93 here, this will now override anything below it, which for the most part doesn't make sense if you're going to be doing it on the exact same group. But if you wanted to say, okay, I'm just going to change the fiber strength on the arm muscles, right? So I select all the arm muscles, hit enter. So I did that I already had the new tab. I clicked the cursor and I selected and hit enter. The other way you can do it is to select the muscles, press A, and that will also create a new tab for you with those muscles. I'm just going to remove it because I don't need it twice. But so now you can see here in the group field, there is a list of all the muscle IDs that I selected in the viewport. And this is the most correct way of specifying your muscle groups. I would caution against using a predefined group that you define with a group node or something similar. It works in some of the cases, but not all of the cases. And I would also caution against using wildcards. Again, that works in some of the cases, but not all of the cases. So this is going to give you reliable results. It's also worth noting, if you're only specifying this for your L muscles, if you put a muscle mirror down afterwards, it will correctly mirror it for the other side. So you don't need to worry about putting in a wildcard to say, I want this to affect both sides if you're doing this when you only have one side specified. When at this point, you only have one group of muscles that you plan to mirror later. If you're doing it with your muscles already mirrored, you will need to make sure that you're selecting both sides. Okay, so back to the stack. So now we've set everything for all the muscles, and now we're saying for the arms, I want to change the fiber strength and perhaps the fiber damping, right? So it will leave all the untoggled values as whatever value is further down in the stack and only change the ones you have specified. So now if we look in the geometry spreadsheet, if I go to the fiber strength, which is fiber stiffness, if I sort it from highest to lowest, you see these orange point IDs here correspond to the selected muscles. So we can see that they have a fiber stiffness of 9.93, whereas the other non-selected muscles have fiber stiffness of 5. Similarly for fiber damping. Well, I haven't actually changed the value yet, so let's change it and we'll see that it is changing. Now, this is when it's set to absolute. So now this is setting it to exactly the value we want. We can also set it to relative. Let's say, for instance, I want to double it. Now it will set it to double what's lower down in the stack, namely 0.02, which means that if I come in here and change this, maybe I'm going to set this to 0.02. Now this is going to double it. So no matter what the value is here, it will double it. So now it's going to be 0.04. So basically, if you know you always want this muscle to be damped twice as much as the general muscles, it will make more sense to set it to relative. Whereas if you want to set it to a very specific value, then it makes more sense to set it to absolute, no matter what other settings you end up setting for other muscles. And then it's also just to bear in mind with the stacking nature of all of this. If I decide, I want to change my settings for my biceps, I'm not quite happy with that. I can select it, press A, and we'll create a new tab. This will still be in the previous tab, but now anything I change here will override the settings for the previous tab. So I can say, okay, now I want to change the fiber damping for the biceps. And I'm going to say I want it to be double whatever's below it in the stack. So now it's going to take the initial value of 0.2, and then here this tab is defining for the biceps, so it will set it here. It will set it to an absolute value of 0.101, so it will completely override the previous one. But if we set it to relative, it's now going to double this. So now we'll get a 2.04. And now if we double this again, here it will set it to 2.08. And if we look here, we see that that is indeed the case. Whereas your other muscles are still 0.04, the other arm muscles and the general muscles are still 0.02. So that is how the stack works for if you are specifying the same muscle multiple times. Typically, it wouldn't make sense to have a tab with the biceps and then another tab with only the biceps and then another tab with only the biceps. That it doesn't make sense. But if you are doing it, say, in groups like this, and then you decide, oh, there's just this one muscle that I'm going to change, then you'll do it in another tab. And then it's very important to just be aware of what the stack does. And now I haven't got the fiber strength checked on, so it's going to still use the fiber strength value here for the biceps. But if maybe I'm going to change the shape stiffness here, so it won't take into account, there's no shape stiffness set here, so it's only going to take into account the general shape stiffness that was set. So I hope that clears up how this stack works. The muscle constraint properties has exactly the same interface where you will hit enter to enter the view state. If you're not already in it, I'm going to hit escape to get out of the view state just to show what it's like. So hit enter to enter the view state, set your general settings on your first tab, then go in and select whatever muscles you want to modify. Press A, create a new tab, or if you prefer, you can create a new tab, use the cursor, select muscles that way, press enter. But now another neat trick, which is on both the muscle properties and the constraint properties, if I say I select this muscle and I hit enter, it is now going to jump to the tab where that muscle is specified. Here I'll go to the general settings. If I select the bicep and hit enter, it's going to jump to 3, not 2. Even though it's specified in both, it will jump to the highest tab number where that muscle is specified. So that is a neat feature that's handy to use, especially if you start getting a lot of muscles and you can't remember which one you set where. Just selecting the muscle, hit enter. If it doesn't jump to a tab, you know that it's only set in the general settings. So then you don't need to find the tab either because it doesn't exist. So if you then want to set it, you will say A to tweak it for that and so on. And yeah, you'll see that it is highlighting, depending on what tab you're in, it also highlights the muscles in that tab, right? So this is a different highlight. So this type of outline highlight is showing which muscles. Sometimes it just takes a little while to refresh. You might have to move your cursor to the viewport to actually get it to refresh, but it will show which one it is. And again, that's in both. So those are very useful features that I recommend everyone make use of. Again, it's one of those things where if you sort of are used to Houdini and used to doing everything in the parameter interface, you might not actually think to even use the view state. And I recommend giving it a try just to make use of that extra handy feature. I mentioned earlier that this is the correct way to specify a group. Let me just show what I mean by it's sometimes not working if you specify groups using something like a group node. So I'm going to create a group node. I will call it, say, obliques. So I'll call it obliques. I will select all the obliques. I can even do it from here. Right? So here's my obliques primitive group. Now, let's say, okay, I'm going to create a new tab and I'm going to specify the obliques group. Now, this will work fine on the muscle properties. If we have a look over here at the damping ratio, which I believe is called shape solid damping ratio. Oops. Here we go. So yeah, see that set it? And you can see another thing I forgot to mention. Oh, I forgot to show this. If I delete the color attribute, because it's the color attribute that's throwing this off. I'm going to delete the color attribute, and now you'll see that all the muscles that are overridden, that aren't just in the set by the general settings, are going to show up in white and red, whereas all the muscles that are only shown in the general settings, that are only set in the general settings, will show up in this sort of black and blue color. So if you uncheck this enable all, it will it's a way of turning off all the settings inside this tab without having to delete the tab, because then you can easily re-enable it if you want. So you can see it's now made these muscles red to show that it's been affected and it's doing what we want. However, in the muscle constraint properties, if I do the same thing and choose obliques, it's going to be fine for most of these values. For instance, the one that's easiest to see is going to be if I change the muscle ends, right? Let me just go in here towards the highlighting to update. So that affected the correct muscles. However, and don't get too caught up on what I'm doing, because I will explain it all later, but there's this option here called attachment candidates. And if I say I only wanted to attach to this rectus abdominis muscle, you see that this is basically not having any effect whatsoever. And you see that by the number, these green lines, which are the constraints, they're the muscle-to-muscle constraints, they are not changing. However, if I were to actually go in and select these muscles, you see that it does have an effect, right? So that is what the downfall of using this method is. It works for most of the settings except the attachment candidates, and that's the attachment candidates as well as the glue candidates in muscle to muscle, as well as muscle to bone. And so because there are some things it doesn't work for, I suggest never using it, because you don't want to get into a situation where you're doing all of this and you're expecting it to behave a certain way, and maybe today you remember that, oh, I can't do attachment candidates with this, but then in a month you've forgotten and you try and you don't understand why it's not working the way you do, or perhaps another artist is tweaking it for a shot and they want to turn on specific attachment candidates and they don't understand why it's not working. It's just going to end up giving you more of a headache to do it this way, I believe, than to just specify, instead of specifying them in a group here, just go ahead and specify them here, right? It's not really that much more work, because you're just doing the same thing in a different place. And you can just say here obliques so that it's clear that these are the obliques. Now, having said that, I will in future perhaps be able to change this limitation. But for the time being, this is how it is. All right, so I have shown the downfall of using a group name as opposed to muscle IDs. Actually, I wouldn't want to use the name attribute. I'd rather use the muscle ID attribute. And it's the same thing if you say used a wildcard. It's going to give you the same type of issues as using a group name like this. All right, so hopefully that has made it clearer. Even though it is designed to all be able to be used in one node instead of having to stack a whole bunch in a row, if you prefer, you can still stack them in a row. So you can still create another muscle properties node after this. In this case, it will just behave like adding more tabs here. So you won't have to have another. You only need the general settings on everything on your first tab, on your first node. You don't need to do it here. So here you can go in and say here, maybe you want to set your leg settings, right? And then here you can say muscle properties legs. This is just completely you could still go in and put in, oh, here I want to tweak just this calf muscle and blah, 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 but still just group the nodes by different regions. It's up to you. You can do it all in one node, you can do it in multiple nodes, but I'm just saying that it's completely valid to still do it this way, and you don't need to do the general settings in your first tab in this case. But remember, if you decide, oh, I'm going to bypass this, now you no longer have your general settings set anywhere, so now it's back to being a mystery what it was. So as long as you're aware of that, it's completely safe to use this type of workflow. I'm going to show one last thing that can cause people to trip up. So I just want you to be aware of it. And that is this insert before button. Now you'll have it on all tabs. So it's going to insert the tab before the one you're currently on, which means it's going to insert it lower down on the stack, which you very rarely will want to do. Especially not for the first one. You don't want to insert something before your general settings and set something on a specific muscle, because let's say I want to set my mass density. Here's the solid mass density. You see, it's not picking up this value at all, because this general settings is now higher in the stack than this single muscle, and it's overriding it. So only if I untoggle it will I suddenly actually be able to get that value. And I wouldn't want to untoggle my general settings. I could untoggle just the mass density to allow that to pass through from a layer below, but then again, all the other muscles that aren't specified here, their value will be a bit of a mystery for the mass density. So never put a single muscle or a single group of muscles before your general settings, and especially not by using the insert before button accidentally. So I'm going to delete that. So yes, if you want to add something to the top of the stack to tweak it, rather use this plus or select your muscle and press A. In the next video, I will show you what all of these parameter values actually can control.